rights. That is a systemic first principle that we simply don't agree with. So it's not that, and I'm not, and if there was a movement to try to elect federal judges, I would entertain that. Yes.
And to broaden the conversation, the authority and responsibility that's given to large corporations during the free trade negotiation process is another indication of how corporations have taken over in democratic process, and the role of the states in making and advising free trade agreements or and negotiating those, and Congress as well, because Congress must act in the fast track process, must act on those trade agreements within 30 days. Now we know that that's not the case right now, but we need to have a system that allows for people rather than corporations to make decisions, whether it's about trade or whether about finance, to ensure the integrity of our Constitution. I think that's what this is about.
Yeah, well, to follow up on the question here, if this were passed, wouldn't it mean a sort of revision of any number of other precedents and changing of laws that have been established? Because, I mean, in other words, I think it's a very fundamental, would be a very fundamental change and clarification of what is personhood, and therefore would mean that a number of other laws that corporations have pushed through would have to be revoked.
Well, it's not that they would have to be revoked, just to be clear, if and when, and I will say this because I think of myself as in the same spirit as the abolitionists or the women's suffrage movement or the trade union movement. I am thinking about myself as a transformational social change agent. I expect to live in a different country in the next 10 to 20 years. I really do. And to that, and that's why I do agree with Robin, sir, that this is a kind of root principle. It doesn't actually fix any problem. It changes the fundamental rules that have been the hook by which so many, literally thousands of laws have been overturned. And it's why I agree with you. This is not merely about campaign finance laws. But I'll tell you this, when the Constitution is amended, laws like Vermont's laws would not only be legal, but there would be lots of others that would be legal as well.
Frankly, you're wrong. As the Supreme Court, or the court decided about the Vermont law, it struck down the $400 limit on campaign contributions because it said it violated the First Amendment. And that was an individual limit. It had nothing to do with corporations, period.
And if you take a look on the back, our actual proposed language includes 3 bullet points. 1, to abolish corporate personhood. 2, that is actually equally tied, establish firmly that money is not speech. 3, it's to guarantee the right to vote, because since you mentioned Bush versus Gore, we know that the Supreme Court has made it clear that our rights to vote are only state laws, and we don't actually even have a federal right to vote.
Well, they actually ruled that there was a federal right to vote. There was a federal right to vote in that unique case. And in no other case.
Fair enough. No, I stand corrected. You're right.
If they had stuck with the state law, we might have had a different precedent over the last 8 years, because the Florida recount might have proceeded.
So, yeah, and I stand corrected. But the point that I'm making is that for us, by establishing clearly that it is obvious, isn't it? Money is property, and so ought to be treated as property. So. This amendment, in fact, would allow a law like Vermont, should it were passed as we're proposing, it would in fact allow that Vermont law to stand. Yes?
I'm not sure I understand how that would have happened, because our law was not struck down by the Supreme Court because of corporate influence. It had nothing to do with that at all. I mean, our law was struck down for about 7 reasons, true. And none of them had to do with corporations. I mean, I have no problem with not having, I'm confused by the whole issue. I will be honest here. And my main goal right now is campaign finance.
Mhm.
But I don't think that the law that was struck down 2 years ago would have been any different had this amendment been there.
So, and I will, let me acknowledge that it has been many years since I actually read that law, and I would have to go back and before I would be comfortable continuing the conversation, sort of, giving legal analysis on it. So let's put that aside for a moment. I will say this, and try to really take a step back and be equally candid. The point that we're making here is, isn't it time that folks who share a basic view of a peaceful, just, democratic, and ecologically sustainable world actually begin to articulate that we recognize, just as the Tea Party is doing, that really we've got a problem here with Wall Street, with the big banks, and so forth. And what I'm saying is a movement to challenge corporate constitutional rights is in essence a democracy movement. It is a call to make the United States of America a functioning democratic republic. And it will not solve any of the problems. It will be up to the legislators then to continue to build on that political movement. And it's also important to recognize that members of the Tea Party actually agree with us on a first principle issue. Really, corporations aren't persons. They shouldn't be allowed to claim constitutional rights. People who come out of the libertarian movement are sort of with us. So, go ahead.
So what does it mean for a corporation to declare, to have constitutional rights? I mean, we're still going to have pharma lobbying us. We're still going to have energy corporations spending money and lobbying us. So I guess I don't understand what it means for them to have constitutional rights or not have constitutional rights. They're still going to exist, and they're still going to be special interest groups, and they're still going to spend a lot of money and exert pressure on us.
Yeah, well, I don't disagree with that, and I'm not going to suggest, would that it were true, that I had come up with the one single thing that would actually make everything else better, because I don't think that exists. But I do think that this notion of corporations claiming constitutional rights has been one of the linchpins for why corporations, especially over the last 25 years, have amassed ever greater power and control over all of our institutions.
Can you give me an example of a law that was overturned because a corporation claimed constitutional rights?
Yes, Pennsylvania Coal versus Mahon, where a coal corporation claimed that the Pennsylvania law that attempted to restrict slant wall mining was violating their equal protection laws, and so that law actually got overturned. And most of, not all, but most of the campaign finance laws that have been overturned on the basis of the First Amendment free speech rights of the corporation. And remember that laws as it relates to the to sort of big box stores. There's the case on J.C. Penney. It was back in the day, a community, I can't remember if it was a community or state, said, well, we would rather have the small local merchants, and so we're going to tax them differently. We're going to tax local merchants differently than the big box stores. And the corporations came in and said, you've just violated our equal protection, because the 14th Amendment says all persons must be treated equally under the law. And the courts upheld, or the courts overturned that.